very special guest, Caitlin Carter from the Higher Education Leadership Initiative for Open Scholarship, or HELIOS. She's the program manager for the Open Research Funders Group. And, as we were talking through what types of discussions we wanted to have, open scholarship and incentive structures and things of that nature kind of came to the forefront as a topic of interest to a lot of us. And so I see, Jenny, your hand up. Yeah.
Thanks, Cindy. Sorry, I should have mentioned this. Caitlin had noted in the chat whether we would like questions saved till the end or throughout. I don't think we necessarily have a preference, correct, Cindy? So whatever is easier for you, Caitlin, if you like to address questions as you go along, or if you'd like them at the end.
Great. So thanks, Jenny, for bringing that up. So just to kind of introduce Caitlin, and then Caitlin, I'll let you share your screen. I mentioned that she's from HELIOS. She operationalizes the HELIOS community of practice to make open scholarship easier for individual researchers and the institutions that support them, to align incentive structures like hiring and reappointment, promotion and tenure, to properly reward open activities such as data sharing and open access, to stimulate durable, scalable infrastructure that supports open scholarship, and to coordinate with like-minded activities in the governmental, philanthropic, and professional society sectors. And that includes federal agencies, updating or establishing new public access policies. And previously, Caitlin served as the scholarly communication and informationist at Johns Hopkins University's Welch Medical Laboratory. And today she's here to talk to us about HELIOS's efforts to advance open scholarship incentives reform. And Caitlin, I know a lot of us are very excited to hear what you have to say, and what you all are doing as an organization has been great. So welcome, and I'll let you share your screen and get us started.
Sure, thank you. And sorry for putting so many corporate buzzwords in a biography that I sent to you quite a bit ago. And I apologize in advance because I'll probably have a few more sort of academic or federal buzzwords and or acronyms. So with that, please, I will do my best, but please ask questions throughout. I'll try to monitor the chat, or you're welcome to just whatever you want to do, raise your hand. As informal as you would like this to be for this. So again, program manager for HELIOS. I'm going to call it HELIOS from now on, just because that is less of a mouthful. But today I really want to talk about HELIOS, a little bit about like the background, the context, just to then focus in on that like RPT or tenure, promotion, review, hiring reform. And then a little bit of an update on January NASA supported workshop with about 50 leaders we have coming. So a little bit more context. So HELIOS is a project of the Open Research Funders Group, and that is a partnership of philanthropic organizations committed to the open sharing of research outputs and other forms of scholarship. So HELIOS is a project of ORFG, and that is generously supported by some of the funders here. So HHMI, John Templeton Foundation, Schmidt Futures, and Templeton World Charity Foundation. And then ORFG and HELIOS are projects of SPARC, which is the Scholarly Publishing and Academic Resources Coalition. A little bit of a nesting doll scenario that might not matter quite as much, but as I talk about coalition building and policy reform, a lot of times I'll talk about the importance of sort of that cross-sector alignment and hearing about the importance of open scholarship and valuing open scholarship from across sectors. So it's a little bit important to share that, there's philanthropic and federal movement, for example, in this space as well. So speaking of coalition or cross-sector building, HELIOS is also a project that emerged from the National Academies Roundtable on aligning incentives for open scholarship. The roundtable brings together, it's still ongoing, senior leaders from universities, funding agencies, societies, foundations, and industry to discuss incentives for adopting open science practices, current barriers, and ways that we can all work with one another within the disciplines to develop hiring, review, tenure, and promotion, and funding practices that are more reflective of open scholarship or open research principles that I think what I mean when I say that, but we'll go into it just in case. So the ORFG itself, the philanthropies, the private philanthropies, the 26 of them that are OFG members really have had success in changing their incentive structures, their grant making, to ensure that it's more equitable, that it rewards open scholarship activity. And so we hope to translate, or have been trying to translate, some of this work into the higher education community, which is where I came from as the informationist at Hopkins. At its core, for Helios, it's really a community of practice. So it's made up of higher education leaders. It's free to join, but we ask that presidents and provosts elevate open scholarship as a strategic priority at the institution. And by doing that, what we really mean in practice is that they need to designate a senior representative from their campus staff to join a working group. And then the promise is to then socialize that work back across campus units. A deeper look at our leadership team and some of our work streams. Something important that emerged from the National Academies Roundtable was the idea that higher education leaders need to prioritize open scholarship. For a really long time, open science initiatives, open scholarship, that's really lived within the library or at an individual researcher or grassroots community level. You're probably familiar with your community and maybe a group of researchers sort of coalescing around one open data set, and then they've maybe taken some of those, data sharing norms and practices back to their peers and stimulated this sort of grassroots culture of open scholarship data sharing practices. So these leaders really took note of the power of open scholarship, and they issued a Dear Colleague letter in 2019 with a call to action to their peers. They said, now is the time for colleges and universities to support open scholarship, sharing research results of all kinds openly as early as practical. So we held a kickoff meeting in March 2022. 65 institutions signed up and said, we want to be a part of this cohort. In the opening meeting, Dr. Crow from Arizona State described the power of openness at scale and talking about increased speed of enhancements into our knowledge core, more meaningful and evidence-based outcomes. Also talked about breaking down some of the communication barriers between scientists and also between science and the public. He focused a little bit on climate science and sort of the problem that hoarding your data creates for the benefit of, climate science advancement and better understanding of needs. Benedict College President Rosalind Artis stressed the importance of open scholarship as the head of an historically Black liberal arts college, really pointing out the fact that it's not just the major research institutions that do a lot of the, do all the research and have the acumen to do that. There's a importance in the diversity of ideas, different types of institutions being at the table, and they were really happy to be at the table to really show off how the work that they do and the ability to collaborate more effectively across institutions, which she said is stimulated by open research. And finally, President Daniels, he had published a book, What Universities Owe Democracy, while I was there. And then I think that helped to inspire him to engage in this effort as well. But he called open science in his book an historic disruption, with technology allowing us to connect our research with each other and citizens in a way that would have been unrecognizable even a generation ago. And really, it's time for institutions to show their work and for researchers to show their work. He linked some of the, pandemic issues. There's barriers between scientists and between science and the public that were made more permeable during that time and are still ongoing. So it's an historic opportunity to renew the promise of knowledge creation and diffusion that have inherited in the modern university since 1876. And then he said specifically that openness is an accelerant of discovery and a salve for liberal democracy. So really strong words from our leaders. And I think it really inspired a lot of other peers to engage in the effort. I have listed the 4 working groups. I'm going to focus actually on the Institutional Departmental Policy Working Group because that's specifically related to incentives reform. I'm going to set some more context, but first I'm going to show you who the leads of that group are, showing kind of their positions across campus and where they sit at the institution. So first we have Lakeisha Harris. She's the Dean of the School of Graduate Studies and Research at the University of Maryland Eastern Shore. Alzada Tipton is the Provost and Dean of the Faculty at Whitman College. And Chris Berg is the Director of Libraries at MIT. And she will soon be cycling off to do wonderful things, and we will have somebody else take her place. So when we were at the beginning, again, at that launch, we did survey our members and said, what are the things that you want to work on? We had 65 members. Early on, they said that reforming or updating tenure, promotion, and hiring policies to make these types of activities more rewarding, number one priority for collective action. So through almost 2 years of work and hundreds of researcher consultations, we've been doing a lot of work that I'll go into, but it really became clear by the end, by now, that we need to a clear signal from more leaders that this is a priority, and they will enable pathways for faculty who want change to happen. So our whole theory behind this, and then I'm going to talk about what it looks like in practice with specific examples, is just the need for mutually reinforcing vectors in support of open scholarship. And this is an environment where professional societies, researchers or research leaders like department chairs, deans, provosts, and our federal agencies, philanthropies, and more understand the need to align our values as institutions and as scholars, like to promote collaboration, inclusion, transparency, with our practices like fair data sharing, sharing research outputs, pre-registering, et cetera, or things like ensuring that your research informs policy, but through means of transparency. And then we reward those activities collectively. That's kind of the ideal space we're working towards. So here's a little bit of an example with specific names. So the Sloan Foundation, for example, is giving grants to institutions to form OSPOs, or open source program offices. NSF, NASA, NOAA, they are subject to developing from the OSTP directive public access requirements for compliance to their grants. So institutions that receive, or researchers that receive funding from these, as you probably know, from these grants must make the papers and the data associated with those papers available immediately upon publication. So these are some of the funder ways in, and the requirements that they have and the rewards that they give. At the same time, the institutions will kind of be setting up these structures to support open sharing of software and code or open source software, alongside some of the compliance training or research integrity officers that are developing open scholarship training modules in part with their responsible conduct of research training. And then at the same time, we have individuals like Phil Bourne, who's the Dean of the School of Data Science at UVA, who has ensured that there are data sharing requirements in their tenure and promotion guidelines for faculty for career advancement. So the whole end goal of that is that sharing data becomes more normative, more rewarding, and less scary for researchers. So there's a lot of activities that I just kind of highlighted in detail that lead up to that, end goal of more normative, more rewarding, and less scary. And so we're trying to help with all those things. It's our hope that HELIOS will provide a community to kind of push forward collectively to scale these efforts across higher education and across disciplines. So what are we seeing? I described our ideal ecosystem, and that's again where open scholarship practices are explicitly rewarded and become more normative. But is this happening currently? No, it is not, according to my colleague Erin McKiernan's research. And so I have a link up here. I really encourage you to check out. She's the ORFG community manager, and she's a researcher at UNAM in Mexico City. So Erin and her collaborators work. They basically looked at 900 tenure and promotion policies across North America. And what they found is that there is a high incidence of the terms public and community in these documents, in our institution's mission statements and value statements, but there are neither explicit incentives or clear structures of support for these types of things. When you do see kind of public engaged scholarship or open access, it is either in a negative context, or you're seeing it relegated to the service category, where we know that is work traditionally undertaken by women and minority researchers. So a lot of challenges there with the current system. Other challenges I've heard in my particular work advocating for policy change across institutions is that if one institution or one department changes its policies, then senior faculty worry for the future career trajectory of their students, their trainees, early career faculty. So many times I hear and I heard from senior faculty, I have the privilege now that I have tenure to publish where and how I want to, but I still need to help my trainees and early career researchers publish in kind of those big one-name journals for their own advancement. So it's not about the science, and it's not very equitable. So I see a chat. Just going to check. Oh, thank you, Jim. Yeah, that's the link. So I definitely encourage you to check out Erin's work. There's a lot of other papers that are linked there, and she's a fabulous expert in this area of our tenure promotion policies. So back to the HELIOS working group in particular. So this group, again, #1 priority. So we formed a working group around policy reform to explicitly reward open scholarship. And so they were tasked with coming up with a collective action plan for doing this work, recognizing that there are institutional and disciplinary differences. There's not going to be a one-size-fits-all approach, and that interdisciplinary work is more and more becoming the norm. So as a first step, the group gathered an initial census of the ways in which HELIOS colleges and universities are exploring or would like to explore hiring RPT. I'm going to keep saying, but it's reappointment or review, promotion, and tenure reform in support of open scholarship. And then kind of taking the temperature of institutions and their willingness to do anything about it. And so what we found is that the group really, well, first they produced a joint statement kind of outlining the argument and saying, these are our values that institutions hold, that researchers hold, and really we need to align our policies through a few simple ways that we can do this or explore this. And then we asked institutions to sign on. And that was, I would say it was a mistake, but I don't think it was. Not all institutions signed on. In fact, only one did, Whitman College. Went right to the president. The president was like, yeah, I'll sign on to this. Let's go talk. Let's go start the process. Let's go talk to the faculty senate, et cetera. But really what it was helpful for was starting conversations on campus. And it helped us shape our strategy moving forward while recognizing some of the structural barriers to advancing policy reform on campus. I assume several of you, or if not all of you, have been on a campus or maybe part of a shared governance process. It's tough. So I'm going to outline a little bit of a summary of the process. I obviously welcome your thoughts on navigating shared governance or navigating policy reform on campus. That's something that, keeps me up at night, sometimes in good ways, sometimes in bad ways, but is really important to enacting change. So to help frame our effort, we developed this statement and this framework. We had 87 members at the time. We're now at 98. But at the 87 members, can you sign this? They said overwhelmingly very unlikely to sign. So what we did was, as a group, we came back and what seems like maybe softening the language. Actually, what we did was just changed taking specific actions to let's start a dialogue and then see what happens from there. And overwhelmingly, the institutions said, now we would be much more likely to use this statement. We are actually now starting those conversations on campus, forming the right groups to come talk about the issues. So because we can't just stop there and we don't want to just admire the problem, we're now doing several other things that I will share. The first is, in recognition and celebration of the Nelson Memorandum. Many of you know that that's a catalytic moment for public access and open scholarship. It really, as directs agencies to develop those public access plans, including the requirements to share the papers and data produced from funding. So what happened was this group and members of the National Academies Roundtable produced an issue brief describing some of the opportunities that institutions have. A couple of goals, obviously, to advance the policy reform work we want to see, but also to reassure institutions that you're not alone in pushing towards, rewards for open scholarship. And actually, it can be an opportunity to have your institution not just view things as a compliance box checking activity, but as something that's actually rewarding. So with that in mind, in August of this year, NASA awarded one of our members, Florida International University, a grant to host a leadership workshop to explore some of the themes from that issue brief. And I can put some of the links in the chat at the end, which I'm almost to. But what the goal is here is to get leaders at the table to talk about, okay, so you agree this needs to happen. So what does changing tenure, promotion, review, and hiring to explicitly reward open scholarship behaviors look like? So we're collaborating. We sent out invitations. I make this statement a lot, but I really mean it. You're throwing a party and you think that maybe one or two people might come, if anyone. We have 50 presidents, provosts, VPs of research and faculty affairs joining us in Miami. I am thrilled. I didn't realize that when you're doing the work for such a long time, you don't realize that other people agree with you often. And so it's been wonderful to hear the response from leadership, but also from institutions saying like, yes, we know it. We know that we need to do this, and we know that we're a little bit behind. So at the workshop, I have a few things listed on this page that you might not be able to see really well. So I'll go through, some of the areas of the grant that are the objectives that we have. So our goals are to explore open scholarship as an enabler of, the things that, the unicorns and rainbows. So equity, inclusivity, efficiency, replicability, reproducibility, transparency, trust, et cetera. We commit to working to ensure that open scholarship activities are incorporated into the policies and the promotion processes, engage with the right people on campus, knowing that it's going to look really different for different institutions. It is not one size fits all. And then provide the resources and training necessary to support this rollout. So that's sort of like on HELIOS. So we have the ability to support institutions in navigating the shared governance process and connecting across different institutions to do this work together to combat some of those challenges. Like if my trainee moves on to another institution and they don't have any nature publications, then I've failed. So if it happens at one institution, it needs to translate to another institution. We also will endeavor to meet regularly with those engaged and then publicly share progress on the effort. Again, I'm happy to answer any questions about this, but I do want to end by talking about another work stream, and I appreciate your perspectives on this as well from the disciplinary context as well as interdisciplinary. But we're also going to be collaborating with some of the professional societies that are working in an adjacent community that my co-conspirator, co-leader, Greg Tannenbaum runs. So Greg is the director of ORFG. He's my boss, and he co-leads some of these efforts with me. He leads a group of 12 professional societies that have come together for a lot of the similar reasons that HELIOS institutions have come together. It's time to advance open scholarship rewards, training, et cetera, from the disciplinary lens. And so a couple of examples, the American Society for Microbiology and the Academic Data Science Alliance, or ADSA and ASM, along with a few other professional societies, recently issued or will soon be issuing open scholarship guidance to their communities. Statements were developed in conjunction with that group, All4OS, or Alliance for Open Scholarship, the 12 societies. And the goal is really just to articulate discipline-specific norms in areas such as papers, data sharing, and also affirm that commitment as an organization to supporting things like open infrastructure and training opportunities. So both of those orgs have pledged to collaborate with colleges and universities to devise field-appropriate recommendations for incentivizing and evaluating good practices in open scholarship for the purpose of hiring, review, tenure, and promotion. So that is an emerging work stream when we have free time to really focus in on that. And I really look forward to what that sort of cross-sector collaboration could look like, recognizing that, yes, disciplinary contexts matter, but it's also increasingly becoming more normal for kind of cross-discipline perspectives to be brought into the research ecosystem. So with that, I think I just talked for about 30 minutes, and I'm happy to have a conversation or hear your thoughts, questions, perspectives on any of this work, or share more details about the workshop, for example, if that's of interest as well.
Great. Thank you so much, Caitlin. That was wonderful to hear where you all are headed and where your next priorities are. I'm gonna like to open it up for discussion and questions. And I do see that Mark Parsons has his hand raised. So Mark, if you want to come online and ask your question.
Yeah, thanks, Cynthia. Very interesting talk. Great. It's really cool to see where you all have gotten. First a simple question. Is AGU part of your society initiative? The one that Dan's leading?
They are, yes.
Cool.
And AGU has been a wonderful supporter, collaborator, interested in what HELIOS is doing. And I think is also releasing a statement. If not, they might have already. I can try to find it really quickly, but I know they were working on one. So that's why I didn't have them featured prominently in this.
Yeah, no worries. I just was double checking. That's the home society for most of us, I think. That and maybe AMS. Is AMS doing anything? American Meteorological Society?
I don't believe there. I'm going to send you the link to the All For Us website. Again, this is something that my colleague Greg Tannenbaum runs, but this is a deeper look at their efforts. So you can see exactly.
Okay, cool, thanks. But then my more complicated question is, and I might have missed this because I lost audio for a little bit, but so when you had this statement put out that you wanted universities to sign, and there was initially, major reluctance, but at the same time, it's clear that people are realizing this is important, that we have to do something. I'm really excited to see that you got good response to your workshop. But what was the reason for not, what was the hesitation on making an actual commitment?
Yeah, so you can imagine just the bureaucratic processes. So it's, even when you're all, I'm trying to describe it. I don't need to make an analogy because I feel like you probably understand, but institutions are hesitant to sign onto anything just because I think maybe there's some like risk aversion. I know when I was at Hopkins, we were really interested in signing. The provost wanted us to, was like, yeah, I'm theoretically on board with you signing some other type of statement, but I want you to go ask all the faculty. So I think I spoke to as many as you can. So I think I spoke to like 25 departments, including like several research councils that were like part of major schools. So it's process, and it's just being afraid to have any sort of top-down mandate that could look like they're encroaching on faculty academic freedom or get them in trouble in any way is my kind of not limited. We tried for a while.
Yeah.
And when you have statements too, something else that we talked about, because we were thinking about doing like a NASA workshop closing statement as well. And in our planning meeting, we invited some of like the higher education associations like AAU, APLU, ACE, as well as, some of our HELIOS members and leaders and people that work directly with presidents' offices. And they were like, when you take these statements, you spend so much more time debating out pieces of a statement than actually talking about doing the work. And so that's part of the challenge.
Okay. Yeah, it's interesting because like, say DORA or something, institutions were happy to sign on that. And maybe it's because it's more generic language, it's more principles than actually changing academic practice. Yeah.
And it's so right, that shared governance process and navigating that, it's in the academic freedom, just a little bit.
Academic policy is even worse than government policy.
Someone said, I think it's easier to get a bill passed in Congress than to change promotion policies. So
yeah, I think you're right. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
Great. Any other questions? Jenny, did you have a question?
So thanks, Cindy. Yeah, if there are any other questions online, please feel free to raise your hand or pop your question in the chat, and we will ask it for you. I think Mark actually asked one of my initial questions about kind of the challenges and hesitancies that HELIOS has encountered, but I was also wondering if you could. You talked about kind of initially the compliance aspect and the statement that had been that HELIOS had issued, and I was wondering how you measured, or kind of how you thought about measuring the dialogue, the campus dialogue versus more of a kind of compliance component, because that seems a little more nebulous.
Yeah, so tracking that is difficult. We had to use that survey mechanism to understand what we thought was, like, are you using the statement and are you actually committing to change? And it changed the whole process when we started getting more of that qualitative and quantitative data about, instead on my campus, we formed a committee of like the vice president for faculty affairs, key department chair champions, and the libraries and the VP of research, and we got together to form a group to talk about what the action would look like on our campus. And so those are, I'm not going to say those are like the more interesting stories, but those are some of the specific stories that came from us surveying. But having been a part of some of those groups on campus, just because you form a group doesn't mean you actually do anything. And so again, that's kind of what we're all about, is like, okay, you have to actually do something. And so this effort, this NASA workshop, we hope will kickstart an approach that has us tracking progress of the action on campus.
Okay, thanks very much. And then another question is around kind of whether you've thought about guidance for navigating reform on campus and what that may look like.
Yeah, so a couple of things. So one thing we did was we, as part of the grant and per the suggestion of NASA, is we put together a planning meeting in October, hosted in person in DC, and we brought together a lot of the Helios leaders, but we also brought together people who are in leadership positions from different campuses in the US who did this reform process, whether it's in their department, their school, or as the provost. So they have shared like the how-to, or like the steps that they took to enact reform. We also have a couple of, again, we're putting together, the success stories. We're putting together a bunch of materials, but also included are some of the specific examples of policy language. So like the Department of Psychology at the University of Maryland, they've done this as a department. It took him, I think, 10 years to get faculty on board, but then they realized, like, of course, and co-developed it. I don't think he'd recommend that whole process and taking 10 years to do it, and that's not what we'd recommend, but we'll take it. University of Vermont, for example, passed a faculty senate resolution for the entire university, saying like all schools and departments must develop. But again, that doesn't mean that they'll actually implement it. It's getting them that implementation piece to happen. I mentioned Philborn UVA. So we have examples of specific policies. We have examples of individual leaders and what they did with their faculty. That's starting to become clear in conversations with workshop attendees, that they would like to know, like, what conversations did you have with faculty? What were your talking points? How did you get them on board? And then, like, what did your process look like for doing the reform? And so we are gathering, compiling, and sharing all of that with those who are interested in doing this work. And I'll also add my final thought to that is, for this NASA workshop, you know, we want action to happen. So that's really the goal, is to get institutions to commit to taking this action. But we also really want institutions to not stand in, or institutional leaders to not stand in any faculty's way that want to do this. That's something that came up over and over again, is talking with departments, talking with individual faculty who said, like, I applied for this job because it had open science in the description. And that's really I wanted to focus on, as well as all my other things that faculty focus on. But then I never got evaluated on it. It never came up again. And when I tried to suggest changes to the department's guidelines, they were rejected by the provost. So we'd like that to stop happening.
Yeah. There's a question, actually a follow-up question from Mark, as far as any examples of leading professors promoted through the process.
Yeah, Mike Doherty at UMD, Rebecca Sachs is the School of Science at MIT. Yeah, I'm just writing them in the chat so you have their names so I can shout them out even further. Philborn UVA. Yeah, so these are just a few, but they have either gone through they actually have all gone through the process with their faculty of changing.
So no, I mean more like, I know Philborn, but Philborn was, you know, a hero and recognized long before he went to UVA. I'm thinking more of like a professor who's, you know, come on the scene, is now a rising star, that, you know, because they were really great at sharing their data and software or something, you know, that sort of thing. It sounds like you have some success stories like that.
Yeah, and some members of Helios, or representatives to Helios, that are like leaders in like sharing my data. I've done these wonderful things. So at Hopkins, Arturo Casadevall, and he's sort of in that leadership position, but he would come to all the research integrity colloquium with the School of Medicine and be like, H-index is bad, we need to stop using it. And I share my preprints and then I get all these publications from them. So it might not be like the talking points I'd use or the strategy I'd take, but he makes his point quite well by being that type of like bold, like, the metrics are bad, the way that we're measured is bad, I do this and these open practices, therefore I've been recognized.
Right, thanks.
Thanks, Caitlin. And there are a number of questions in the chat, but one quick follow-up question. Have you seen these activities buoyed by the Year of Open Science, the kind of federal level Year of Open Science?
Yeah, so that's, I think, what got a lot of leaders' attention was the brief that we produced because of the Year of Open Science, the NASA memorandum. So pulling on that and drawing on that, knowing that leaders obviously care about compliance. A really interesting trend as part of like the HELIOS makeup, like the makeup of the working group representatives, is that we're seeing several chief compliance officers and research integrity officers really be actively involved in this space, as well as a few chief information officers and folks from like supercomputing, which is a research computing, often an untapped group, or at least you wouldn't go there to always find sort of your open science advocates, but they're leading the charge on exploring issues of, research security and open scholarship, as well as they relate to like federal public access compliance, as well as some of these other issues. So that's been a really wonderful kind of trend that we've been watching, because it's really important to have institutions not view things just through a compliance lens and like you're in trouble if you don't comply and these are the behaviors to comply, rather than like we reward and support these behaviors.
Thanks. And then there's a question from Rachel regarding tracking process. What key metrics do you have in mind that you think represent positive substantive change?
Yeah, so it's easy to count like how many institutions actually changed their policies and then in what ways did they change them. So we can do those kinds of things, but this is actually an area that we would like to spend the afternoon of the workshop, not fully, but talking about what success looks like with the leaders there, just to really get them invested. And I'm not saying that because it sounds like an out to like, I don't know, but we have a lot of efforts ongoing that I won't bore you with, that are related to like the measurement and evaluation of like the impact of open scholarship changes. And so if you change policy, is it actually doing X, Y, Z, or what you want it to do? Is it creating more collaborations? Is it actually creating more opportunities for early career researchers? So we have a few irons in the fire to explore what like tracking, measuring, evaluating would look like. And specific to this work, we want to co-develop some of those metrics with the leaders who are the 50 or so leaders who are at the workshop.
Yeah. And actually, a follow-up comment from Douglas that I was thinking about. He points out that it would be interesting to see what differences there are, or if there are differences from different types of institutions, public versus private, R1 versus other types, etc.
Yes and no. I think every type of institution thinks that they are very different, even if you are like but you get 12 R1s in a room and they'll all talk about how they're very different and their cultures are very different, but pretty much all of them didn't want to sign a statement. All of them have the same challenges with like trying to get policy reform changes happening on campus. And so there are obviously really clear ties to the same problems, even when institutions, at least from my having oversight of 98 institutions, my opinion. At the same time, yeah, there are also differences that can be good or bad. Whitman College, small liberal arts college, small teaching college, took that statement, went right to the top and enacted the change. And I don't know if that's necessarily because it's a smaller college. I've worked at both. I've worked at research universities and I've worked at smaller colleges. At least in my experience, you can go right to the provost's office or the dean of the faculty and say, like, I'd like to do this. Let's explore how. Whereas it might look a little different with the silos at a large research institution. But I think generally all of them were afraid of signing statements and interested in exploring and admiring the challenges to policy reform and shared governance processes. Yet when you actually like want to take an action, it seemed easier at a smaller teaching college. And also there's a lot of work in like with APLU in focusing on modernizing the culture of higher ed at the public and land-grant universities for societally impactful scholarship. That's on one of our, I'll send a link, but we're putting together like a lit review or further reading for institutions. And they've put together a report about changing tenure and promotion to reward societally impactful scholarship. And we clearly see that sharing and being transparent can enable the societally impactful scholarship in many ways. So I think that is, knowing that is, the large land grant universities, I think that there's going to be a lot of momentum there as well to engage.
Just a follow-up comments, I think the question I had about public versus private, just because, especially when you're talking about a lot of state university systems, then there's also the state legislature that can put limitations on what they can do, or what certain type of funding that they got can be used to do certain things. So there are some back and forth discussions on another policy related questions we are talking about for like postdoc and early career, like type of policies, which you can clearly see certain states will be putting on a lot of restrictions on what they can do and what they cannot do.
Yeah, and we're also seeing some restrictions on just validating your comment and question, and also seeing some challenges with, when we talk about the open scholarship and so our institutional or researcher values of like equity and inclusion, there's challenges in certain states. And we are hosting this workshop in Florida and have had those conversations about, are you able to engage in this conversation? And overwhelmingly, the institutions have said yes. So yeah, so it's definitely a consideration, and agreed that there are different considerations depending on the type of and the mission of an institution.
Thanks, Caitlin. Other questions for Caitlin? And again, feel free to come off mute. Hi, Bob. Would you like to come off mute and ask your question?
Yes, thanks, and thank you very much, Caitlin. I'm just wondering if at the lower levels than the top, if you might have some more success, that is, working just with a school of perhaps humanities or social science or physical sciences, because often they have different policies within each school at a larger university, and trying to get everyone to agree across all the different schools might be impossible, but just working with one or a couple of them within a particular university, you might have more success. Thanks.
Yes, thank you for that question. It's a great question. And I didn't kind of focus on some of the more details of the work we've been trying to do for the last 2 years, but part of it is, so we like to say we have like a top down, bottom up, and middle out approach to our work, because we literally try everything to get institutions to move. The reason that we're now going to the top is that, like, when trying to do that and trying to like rally the grassroots, get the middle to like pay attention or at least come to the table, we have not had success. And even like the advocates or those who have done it from like a school level, or like, it's really hard because even in my own, so for example, Rebecca talks a lot about how she and the university librarian tried to get one sentence on the agenda to talk about the activity that they were doing to change their policy at the School of Science on the faculty senate agenda, and like could not even get a sentence or time on the agenda. And so we are thinking, or we hope that by gathering leaders to talk about this, they will bring the champions or identify the champions as sort of like the going forward, like what the action, what it could look like going forward, knowing that they'll co-develop it. Find a school to pilot, find department chairs who might be rallied or interested, engage faculty who are champions of this effort, and see what it looks like. It's probably not going to look like, okay, we passed a faculty senate resolution and now we're just going to all do this as a top-down mandate. It kind of has to be the way that you describe, if that makes sense. And it's going to look different for different institutions. So hopefully that validated and answered your question.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Any other questions or comments? Okay, well, thank you again, Caitlin. Cindy, should I pass it back to you to wrap up?
Sure. Or, if you want to add anything as well. Caitlin, as Jenny said, thank you so much for being here. ESIP is an interesting group of people that are really passionate about this. And so hopefully by hearing your barriers and challenges can, take action to help move this process and along. And so we're excited that you came and presented to us. This has been a great presentation, and we're so excited to have you here. Jenny, do we want to, or anything we want to close with? Otherwise, we appreciate you all being here and participating in this cluster. And I don't think we're going to have one for December because it falls right around the holiday timeframe. But I know a lot of us will be at AGU, and so it'll be exciting to be in some similar sessions and things of that nature. Jenny, anything else you want to add?
Yeah, thanks very much, Cindy. And as always, we will post the webinar on the Open Science Clusters wiki site. This wraps up our webinar series, actually, and so I think that it has been really successful. We have kind of built it out in 4 different areas. I think this was a great presentation to wrap up on. I did see in the chat that I think Lorraine could potentially be interested in co-leading the cluster going forward. So I will send a follow-up email to the cluster and include the links that Caitlin has shared today. And if anybody has questions, comments, please, as always, feel free to contact me, to contact Cindy. And a final thank you once again to Caitlin for presenting today, and to Morgan for always helping us along with this process.
Yeah, thank you all so much.
Thank you, and a happy rest of 2023.